everyone, and welcome to my channel. My name is Brooke, and today I want to share my fertility story. I want to share from the beginning what we have gone through trying to get our baby. So I don't think anyone has heard any of the details I want to share here with this forum. I think that the social network has certainly helped me when I was going through my fertility struggles and my 2-week wait and my stimulations and surgery. So I want to be able to help other women and other people as well. So you kind of know what to expect, know from my point of view on my experience and what I learned from those challenges and what I hope to be able to share with you, perhaps to help other people as well. So my husband, Jose, and I have been married for 10 years, 2022 to be 10 years, but we met back in high school. We were high school sweethearts, but we were separated in time until 2009, and we reunited, and we were married in 2012. So we were in our 30s. We both come from past relationships that we did also have children in both of our relationships. So my husband has 2 girls and I have 2 boys and a girl. So we are a blended family. But in the beginning of our relationship, my husband said that he wanted to have a son because he has 2 girls. So I said I would certainly be interested in doing that. I definitely want to complete our family. So that's when we started to keep in the back of our minds that we one day wanted to have a baby. And with me having 3, I thought it wouldn't be a struggle. But I'm one of those people that are considered secondary or I have a second infertility issue because of course I have the 3 kids, but it's been a challenge for me to go through a successful pregnancy. So this is secondary infertility for me. But when I had my daughter, I decided to tie my tubes. So there were some options that I had to consider if I wanted to go and conceive again. And my husband's family had also been in blended relationships, and they had considered having kids. So they would tell him, you know, if you and your wife want to have another baby, you should, you know, go and see a doctor, a fertility doctor, or your regular doctor, so you can get your tubes untied and start the process. So one of his cousins gave us a referral to a doctor. So back in 2015, I went to see the doctor, and he referred me to a fertility clinic here in my area. So I made an appointment, got the consultation, and they said, come in. So I met with the doctor, and he said, well, since your tubes are tied, I would suggest, instead of untying them, because there's still no guarantee that you would fall pregnant, having your tubes untied, and that's a huge surgery to go through. There's still no guarantee. So he recommended that we try IVF. I had no idea what that involved, IVF. Heard of it, but did not think that I would have to go through that. But I said, well, I can bypass having to have my tubes untied and not knowing whether I would fall pregnant. So yeah, let's go with IVF. So I told my husband. He said, okay, I've heard about other families going through IVF, so yeah, let's give it a shot. So we started back in the summer of 2015. Just to start our appointments, you start all the lab work, you have to get tested, genetic screenings, you have to get a lot of blood work. There's a lot of workup to determine how much of a candidate you are for successful IVF. So we go through all the lab work, and that all works out fine. My husband's sperm is fine. My AMH and FSH levels are good. At the time I was 36. So yeah, everything looked good. He said, let's get started. So we did. And there were some, things that we had to wait to really get started, because we had 2 vacations that we had planned that year, 2 weddings to go to on an island. So we went to the Bahamas, went to Dominican Republic, and when we came back, got right straight into our fertility treatment. So I was really excited. It was my first time, more or less, going through any kind of procedures like this. So we started getting the medications, started with the injections and the estrace, and we had scheduled our retrieval. So our first retrieval was in November 2015. Our workup went well. I more or less had 18 eggs that were retrieved, and out of those 16 eggs, 4 of them became healthy embryos. And we decided with those 4 healthy embryos that they're day 5 of healthy 4-day embryos, that we were going to have them PGTA tested, which means you're going to have a piece of the embryo taken and sent out for testing for genetic screening, make sure all the chromosomes are there, and that more or less gives you a better idea whether those embryos will likely lead to successful implantation. So out of those 18, 4 of them were strong, and all of them made it through the genetic screening, and we had them all on ice and frozen. So we started with our first transfer after that. And the first transfer was scheduled, and we had to start with the progesterone injections. And those injections were quite difficult for me at first. You're taking the injections in your rear, so it's a bit awkward, and at first I was uncomfortable giving myself needles, so my husband would help daily. So every evening we had to give the progesterone shots, and during the day you take estrace pills, and with that it helps to prepare your body for implantation. So during our first workup, there was a delay in my progesterone injection. So I called the doctor, and when they called me back, they said, well, you're telling me that you missed one of your progesterone injections? And I said, yes. Can I just, catch up on one of my progesterone injections? And she said, no, it doesn't work like that. So we had to stop that cycle, let my period come back, and then restart my cycle, so I can have my body completely ready to receive that embryo. So the medications are really important that you take them on time and you're consistent. So that was a learning experience for me. So the second time around, second cycle, I was ready to go. We're taking all the progesterone injections on time. We're taking all of our pills on time, 3 times a day with the estrace, and things were looking really good. I went through with the first transfer, and my husband and I were there. It was a great experience, and it almost was canceled because on the day of my transfer, the nurse called and she said, well, we may have to push this back a few hours because at the time there was a flu going around, some kind of bacterial infection. And one of the doctors that was supposed to do your transfer had to leave. So we're going to have someone else do your transfer, but they're backed up. So we need you to come a little later. So I went a little later, got the transfer. I was like, oh, great. Who wants to cancel their transfer? But it worked out. Went home, woke up the next day, was taking it easy. They recommend that you have bed rest for 24 hours. So I was taking it easy, being treated like a princess. Woke up the next day and I was feeling a little sick. I ate some oatmeal in the morning, and next thing you know, vomiting. I think I caught the bacterial infection, flu bug that was going around the office. For some reason, when I went in for that transfer, I must have picked it up because I wasn't sick before then. So I don't know. Whatever the case may be, I got sick, and I do think that contributed to an unsuccessful implantation. So yeah, the first The first embryo did not take, so we went forward with preparing for another cycle, and on the second embryo, it actually took, and it was a successful implantation. We were so excited, more or less thinking that it would have worked the first time, but now I see, oh, guess what? You may have to try it again because it's not guaranteed. So we were really happy that the second time worked, and we made it all the way to 6 weeks, and unfortunately that embryo was not viable. So we go forward with embryo 3 and 4. We go for both of those transfers, and neither one of those embryos implanted. So after number 4, we were like, well, what do we do now? We thought we would have a baby after 4 embryos. And unfortunately, we had to sit back from square one and figure out what our plan was, because we had, spent a ton of money on those 4 embryos, and we were hoping that we would have a baby. So we marched on, and we considered retrieving eggs again, making new embryos, and that's what we did. So we went for another retrieval in November of 2016 now. So we were a year later, November 2016. And through that retrieval, we pulled out 8 eggs. And out of those 8 eggs, we made 4 embryos again. And out of those 4 embryos that were able to be frozen, we sent those off to be genetic tested again. And only one of those was genetically normal. So we took that one embryo that was genetically normal, and we said, yes, we're going to implant that. We have one. So right after that testing, we scheduled our transfer, and we were looking forward to it. And unfortunately, that was not a successful implantation. So at this point, we were like, we've gone through 2 retrievals. What should we do now? And that's when we decided to try donor eggs. Our doctor recommended that that may be more likely for successful pregnancy to go with donor eggs. So that was a big workup, and that was a time that I really had to absorb what that would entail using donor eggs with my husband's sperm. But we went through the workup, which included going to a psychologist, and she discussed with my husband and I how we would deal with explaining our situation using donor eggs. And once we got through that, she approved us, we moved forward, and I chose my donor. We had 4 eggs we had 4 embryos that came out of that ICSI, where they take the sperm and they inject it into the egg, and it actually makes the embryo. So we actually got 4. We got 4 beautiful embryos out of that donor. So out of those 4 that were frozen, unfortunately, none of those embryos had taken. None of them were viable. So I went through 4 transfers with those donor eggs, thinking that this is the way that it's going to be successful. And unfortunately it wasn't. And I found out later from my clinic that there was a possibility that that donor was not a good candidate for donor eggs. So basically, it's really basically said that that was a waste of time. That was a waste of my time, energy, and money. So at the end of that 4th transfer that was not viable, the clinic called me and they said, we really want to stand by, beside you on helping you get to your baby. So we're going to give you 6 more eggs from a new donor. And that was great because I was just depleted. We had gone through 2 retrievals. We had gone through a whole batch of donor eggs, and I was depleted. I was like, okay, great. I would really appreciate that. Thank you for helping me at this point, because, I didn't know what else to do. Felt like we had tried everything. So great. So that donor was recommended by the clinic. She certainly checked out this time. And so with the first embryo, I don't think we actually tested those. And we actually didn't test the first donor either, because more or less when you're choosing a donor, and they're young, and it more or less is estimated that you don't really need to test those eggs, because, you know, the donor is supposed to be more healthy. So we didn't test either one of these donors. So with the second donor, first embryo, I got pregnant. It was great. Made it all the way to 8 weeks. And unfortunately, that embryo was not viable. And, you know, it was heartbreaking. And it was like, I don't understand why, you know, the embryo will not continue on past at least 12 weeks. We had made it to 6 weeks at first, and now we had made it to 8 weeks. So after that devastation, my doctor said, come on in and let's have a discussion. So that's when they decided that we need to look internally. And one of the doctors at the clinic was known for being great with her hands at removing endometriosis and basically just making the uterus look healthy and beautiful. So I was scheduled to have a laparoscopy actually, and that's where they go inside of your body from your stomach with these prongs that, I'm sorry, I'm using the wrong terminology, but they use these instruments to go inside of your stomach, and that's where they can look inside and see if there is endometriosis, if there's cysts, if there's any kind of scar tissue, and they were also checking for fibroids, so they did a hysteroscopy as well. Hysteroscopy is when they go internally through your uterus and they look around and see if there's any scar tissue or anything wrong with your lining. So that's what they did. And when they did that laparoscopy and hysteroscopy, I wasn't too bad off. They said there was slight endometriosis. They may have removed some polyps. There wasn't any fibroids that needed to be removed at the time. So that's what they did. And I was good to go. I healed from that surgery, was ready to go forward with my next embryo, because we had one more embryo that was frozen from the donor. So that's when we went to the second embryo for implantation and transfer. So that's when we had that scheduled. So at this point, we are still in, I think, the end of 2018 that we are going for this second embryo. So we do the transfer for that one, and it does not stick. And I think it actually on this second donor embryo is when we had used the glue. So there's a glue that they can use, and it's not proven to actually work, but it's like an implantation glue. So basically they put this solution on the outside of the embryo, and it's supposed to help it like stick better inside of your uterine lining, possibly helping it stick and implant. But unfortunately that didn't work, so there's no guarantees there with that. And they said that, but we still paid, I think it was a couple $100 for that glue. That was the one time we did that. So then next, since that embryo didn't work, we actually also had done, let me back up, no, because we had done an ERA, and an ERA is an endometrial lining receptivity test, where they're going to determine by taking pieces of tissue from your uterus, and they send it off to a lab to be analyzed to see when your uterus is most receptive to the progesterone and most receptive to the embryo being implanted and coming into that environment. So we had done that as well. We had probably done that probably back in like 2017 when I was doing my own embryos. Yeah, so we had done that before we had did the laparoscopy. So that was really useful, because out of the ERA they determined that I had been going maybe 6 days with progesterone, the injection, before they did the transfer. And after the ERA, they said, well, you should go 5 days. So it basically determines the best timing for your transfer. So that was really useful. And I still am using those protocols today that came from that ERA test. The ERA test is very painful, by the way. They take a piece of your uterus. And I just remember leaving the office, like, just hunched over in pain. And oh, that was pretty bad. So yeah, so that's where we then came to 2019, and September 2019, and we had another opportunity to go back to my own eggs. I said, you know what, the doctor's telling me you could do a surrogate, which is very expensive. You can find someone to actually carry the baby. You can go back to donor eggs. I said, well, let me just try my eggs again. So in September of 2019, I did go in for another retrieval. And at that retrieval, I retrieved four eggs. And out of those 4 eggs, there was one that actually made it to day 5. And then out of that one that was going to be tested for PGA testing, that one did not make it through as normal. So basically went through the retrieval, had no embryos. So then I said, well, what is the issue? I feel as though I'm doing everything that I could be doing. I'm resting, bed rest after the transfer. Is it something that I'm doing? We just really didn't know. And at this point, they're telling me that it's unexplained, and they more or less just didn't know. But what I learned through that process is there was a lot to be said for my lifestyle. So I'll tell you later about my lifestyle changes that I made. But I said, well, how about we tried my eggs, my husband's sperm. We've tried donor eggs, my husband's sperm. Is it possible that I could just go for a donor embryo? So the clinic referred me to an agency that did find couples that were not going to discard their embryos. So we decided we just wanted the baby. We weren't considering adoption. We wanted to have our own child through the beginning, through pregnancy. So we got approved through this agency for a donor embryo. There was only one. So for some reason, there was only one, and we just decided to go with that one. We didn't, look for a donor that had more than one. It wasn't actually that many that we chose that would have been our fit out of the donor bank, out of the embryo bank that this agency had. So we just went with the one. So we put the one in, we did the transfer, and unfortunately, it did not implant. So that was also in 2019, so that did not work. So then I decided, my husband said okay, that we could try donor sperm. So that's where we were in 2020, where right before the pandemic, we were scheduled to have our transfer, and the week of our transfer is when the pandemic had hit. So it was March 2020. And so I was ready to go, had all of my stems, was primed and ready to go for my transfer, and the pandemic hit. So that week it was canceled. So I had to wait until the government opened things back up for hospitals and clinics to get back in service. And that's when we had our transfer scheduled. So I didn't go back into my fertility treatments again until June of 2020. And this is where I had already had the donor sperm. It's waiting. We had already made the embryo with my egg, and we were just ready to implant. do the transfer. So that's when we did it in July of 2020. And unfortunately, that was not a successful transfer. So at that point, we had stopped. We had gone through all of those treatments and embryos and failed the miscarriages, and I had just stopped. You know, we had made it through the pandemic's still going, you know, it feels really challenging. We just didn't know what to do. So that's where, you know, I just started to self-reflect, do self-care. My husband, on the other hand, he had learned from going through the beginning process that he doesn't get too tied to the pregnancy until we get past a certain point, because it's hard. And I'm going through it, but he's certainly my backbone and helps to keep me strong and pushing through, you know, when I'm feeling down. So he was really supportive, but it's good to know that he's able to be excited, but doesn't get too wrapped up until we know it's a sure thing, because it's a roller coaster. You're up, you're down. Of course, I'm up and down with the hormones that I'm taking, but the whole process is highs and lows, peaks and valleys in your day. You know, you're looking forward to your nurse calling you with good news, telling you to start your cycle, and then, you know, you're going in for your baseline ultrasound, which you do before every transfer. You go in for your lining checks, and sometimes your lining is not ready. It's not ready for your embryo, so you have to wait. You got to come back another week and continue your protocol until you come back the next week. So sometimes you're really ready, and it's like, okay, your body's like, nope, not yet. So those are the highs and lows that you experience. So at that point, I made a decision that we were just going to take a break. We had been going strong since really 2016. So it was time for a break. So that's what we did. But the story continues. So that's going to be part 2. I'm going to stop here. And hopefully you'll come back and hear part 2 of the fertility story, because I have so much more to share, my successes and challenges. So don't forget to follow and like this video, and I'll see you next time.